All right, I'll look to Ms. Medina. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and orient us. Welcome back. It is the afternoon of October 23rd. I'm Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. And this is the hearing with respect to the proposed Sites Reservoir project. We had left after hearing a summary of uh, testimony from Mr. Namalini, and I believe where we are to pick up is with cross-examination. And I will look to Ms. Chester. I understand you have questions for Mr. Namalini. I can't hear you. Mute, so I don't know why. It may be logging out and logging back in. That sometimes fixes things. We can try that. All right, we can try again, Ms. Chester. Now you're on mute, so we won't be able to hear you.
Can you
There we
hear
go.
me now?
Faintly, can you, I
Is
don't
this
know why that would, it's still very quiet. Are others having the same experience? I'll look to Ms. Medina. Is it quiet for you as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Guys, is this getting any better?
it is getting better. Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Nomalini, my name is Michelle Chester. I'm counsel on behalf of the Sites Project Authority, and I have some questions for you. I do appreciate you being here. Can we please bring up SDWA 31?
You're going to. That's your statement of qualifications.
Huh?
Give me your statement of qualifications.
Oh, okay, good.
We don't have that in front of us.
They're gonna put it up here. Okay,
Thank you. Mr. Nomalini, you are an attorney, correct?
correct,
And in your statement of qualifications, you list Central Delta Water Agency as a current client, correct?
correct.
And you've had you've had a relationship with CDWA for over 50 years, either as a manager or as legal counsel, correct?
That sounds right.
Was CDWA one of your first clients as a licensed attorney?
No,
Okay. Is your participation in this administrative proceeding within the scope of your legal representation of CDWA?
yes,
You're being offered in this proceeding as an expert witness on behalf of CDWA, correct?
both recipient and as an expert, yes.
And what is your area of expertise?
I'm very familiar with water rights, proceedings before the State Water Resources Control Board. Served as a witness before. I'm familiar with the flood risk and flood operations and
Mr. Nomalini, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm asking specifically for purposes of this proceeding, what were you submitted as an expert on?
I don't know what I was submitted as, but I am an expert with
Can-
regard to the matters that are before us involving sites reservoir.
I submitted some documents to the hearing office. Can we please bring up CDWA et al. Case in chief witness list? Thank you. And can we please scroll to page 3? Thank you. Mr. Nomalini, do you see that you were submitted on behalf of CDWA et al. For purposes of case in chief for the limited reasons listed under the subject of proposed testimony?
I would just object to the characterization of limited purposes. Purposes speak for themselves.
Noted.
Mr. Nomalini, do you acknowledge that those are the purposes for which you were submitted in this proceeding?
Yeah, I have no disagreement with that subject of proposed testimony.
As an attorney, you're familiar with the California Rules of Professional Conduct, correct?
Yeah, I am.
Can we please bring up the Rules of Professional Conduct document that was submitted to the hearing office?
Is this the one here?
Mr. Nomalini, do you see that this is the 2023 California Rules of Professional Conduct?
I do.
Can we please go to PDF page 38? And can we please zoom in a little bit to the top of the page? Thank you. Do you see Rule 3.7 at the top of this page labeled lawyer as witness?
Yeah, I'm not serving as the lawyer in this case, but I am serving as a witness in this case.
Can we please change course and bring up the fifth amended hearing notice? And just for clarification, Hearing Officer Kenzie, I am referring to this document, but I'm not clear if you want to mark it as a cites exhibit.
I hadn't decided either.
Okay.
And the same was true, I think, with the witness list. I'm not sure how
Yes.
we'll figure that out.
Okay, that's appreciated. We're just looking to confirm the cites numbering for today's offer of exhibits. Thank you. Mr. Nomalini, did you receive a copy of this fifth amended notice of public hearing issued by the State Water Board in this proceeding?
Yeah, I think I did, yes.
And can we please go to PDF page 6? Mr. Nomalini, do you see your name and contact information listed here?
I do.
And you're listed as one of the attorneys for Central Delta Water Agency et al., correct?
I see that, yes. I'm not serving as the attorney in this case, but I see myself on the list. Our firm is involved on behalf of Central Delta in providing documents and me as a witness.
Mr. Nomalini, I believe you just a few minutes ago confirmed that your participation in this administrative proceeding is within the scope of your legal representation of CDWA, correct?
Yes.
Can we please go back to Rule 3.7?
I would just object to this line of questioning. He's indicated he's serving as a witness. If there is going to be a motion, a written motion to challenge his testimony, then make the motion. Dealing with the rules of professional conduct is always vague, much like this firm was representing the Pescadero Reclamation District in another capacity while also challenging the Pescadero witness. So we get pretty fuzzy if we want to get into rules of professional conduct, and I prefer not to do that.
I wasn't aware there was any challenge or issue with the relationship between this firm and Pescadero Reclamation District 2058. And for purposes of a potential objection to Mr. Nomalini, I do think this line of questioning is relevant and necessary.
Well, as I've said, he's serving as a witness, not as an attorney in this case.
I'd like to clarify with
regardless of what the proof of service says, there's standard proof of service that lists everybody.
So let's
get
pause for a moment here, Mr. Rees and Ms. Chester. I'm going to let Ms. Chester go forward. I think, I can understand she's preparing for some kind of evidentiary objection. I think it's appropriate. She's not confined in her questioning on cross-examination to the testimony. It does have to be relevant. Now, just with respect to the service list, frankly, I think I typed the words attorneys for Central Delta Water Agency et al. And I'm typed those words because I made an assumption. I don't think so. I think we can set aside. The way the service list is phrased, I think, is neither here nor there. However, I think, Ms. Chester, you can go ahead and ask the questions you like to ask, at least as long as it's productive. Hopefully we won't take too long. So
Yes,
thank you. Please go
understood.
ahead.
Thank you. Can we please go back to the professional rules of conduct document? And Mr. Nomalini, do you see under subsection A that the rule begins, a lawyer shall not act as an advocate in a trial in which the lawyer is likely to be a witness?
Yeah, I see the language, yeah.
And do you see under comment 1, where it says that this rule applies to a trial before a jury, judge, administrative law judge, or arbitrator?
I see that.
And do any of the 3 subsections 1 through 3 under Rule 3.7A apply to you?
Let me read it.
Well, Ms. Chester, where are we going with this? Why is Mr. Nomalini's understanding of the professional rules of conduct relevant as opposed to just a general assessment of whether it applies to him or not?
Sure. The question of whether or not these subsection apply to him is relevant to determining if he obtained client consent to serve as both the attorney and the advocate in this proceeding. There's additional discussion in here that suggests that mere client consent is not enough. I'd like more information about Mr. Nomalini's potential representation of other protestants on behalf of CWA et al. Our concern is that, as listed here and identified in comment 3, there is the opportunity for bias and prejudice for serving as both the advocate and the witness to his own clients as well as to participating parties.
Well, I'm certainly biased in favor of the Delta and my client's efforts. There's no question about that. I don't think. And as far as authorization, I'm authorized to do it. I'm the manager and counsel for the district.
I don't think it's necessary for me to respond, but I'm looking specifically for consent as defined in subsection 3 here.
Well, I certainly have the consent.
Objection, this calls for a legal conclusion, and he's already established that he's not serving as counsel in this matter, and the hearing officer has already clarified that the service list is not indicative of that. So trying to corner him into some kind of concession that he may have violated a rule of professional conduct is completely improper.
The language has already been confirmed by Mr. Nomalini that he is serving within the scope of his legal capacity on behalf of CWA, as well as serving as an expert witness in this case. I'm identifying this rule for clarification, but I would agree it's not necessary. At this time, Hearing Officer Kenzie, I would like to note for the record that we request on behalf of the site's authority that you exercise your discretion to disqualify Mr. Nomalini from participating as a witness to avoid the inclusion of both misleading and prejudicial testimony. We will include this objection in our submission of written objections as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chester. I think we can move on from here.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Can we please go to SDWA 11? And can we please go to PDF page 3? Mr. Nomalini, in paragraph 1 of your testimony, you state that you are a resident of Middle Roberts Island abutting the San Joaquin River, correct?
Yes.
And as you saw in the witness list offered by CWA et al., you are not being offered as a percipient witness, are you?
Oh, I'm definitely a percipient witness. I've been in the Delta and been in these various proceedings for many, many years. Yes.
And
that capability, yeah, I can testify to what I've seen and heard.
And I think you would agree that you have a personal interest in addressing any alleged water supply or quality concerns that you raise in your testimony, correct?
Yeah, sure. I'm concerned with the protection of the Delta and the adherence to the law necessary to protect the Delta.
In
And I
your
vested in,
opinion,
yeah.
I apologize. In your opinion, as a practicing attorney, wouldn't you agree that a witness with a personal interest in the outcome of a proceeding may be perceived as biased?
Well, you can perceive me as biased, but I'm certainly a strong supporter of protection of the Delta and adherence to the promises in the law for its protection. Yeah, I can't say that's not a bias. I'd certainly have that strong belief.
Can you please describe your familiarity with the proposed operation of the site's reservoir?
Well, I went up and toured it, and my familiarity is based on what they did, what they put in their application.
Can we please scroll to lines 22 to 25 in this page? In paragraph 3, you state that the water to be diverted by site's application is subject to prior vested riparian and pre-1914 water rights and post-1914 permits and licenses, correct?
Yes,
You don't list any such claims, permits, or licenses, do you?
I do not list them, no.
In paragraph 3, you also state that the water needed for counties of origin is not subject to definitive quantification, correct?
That's correct.
You're not being offered in this proceeding as an expert in hydrology or hydrologic modeling, are you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the modeling. Well, I may be. I have a better understanding than the average person on the street. But I'll tell you, I don't do the modeling. I haven't run models. And all I do is kind of look at the results and what they say you can't rely on them and things of that type. But I'm somewhat familiar more than the average person. So I am an expert to some extent.
Is it your opinion that it is never possible to comply with Water Code section, excuse me, can we please scroll to page 15 first? Paragraphs 38 to 39. Thank you, Mr. Nomalini. In these paragraphs, you cite Water Code section 10505, which states that no priority shall be released nor assignment made of any application that will deprive the county in which the water covered by the application originates of any such water necessary for the development of the county, correct?
Yeah, it speaks for itself. I can't read the entire paragraph on the screen, but it speaks for itself, yes.
Is it your opinion that it is never possible to comply with Water Code section 10505 because water needed for counties of origin is not subject to definitive quantification?
No, I think you can make a concerted effort to evaluate that. I don't think they've done that here. First of all, they've not considered the entire county group that's involved in the Bay Delta watershed. So you have to look at that and come forward with some type of estimate that's based on the acreages that are involved.
Mr. Nomalini, is any of that discussed in your written testimony in relation to section 10505 or your statement of definitive quantification?
Well,
hold on a second. I would just object. Any of what the witness was interrupted.
So Ms. Chester, I'm sorry, you asked a question he was answering.
Answering the question.
So he does get a chance to finish answering the question, and then we can move to your next question, which is whether his answer to that question was included in his written testimony, as I understand it, although frankly, I don't know the point of that question, but.
Understood. I can let it go. I think he's
Okay.
answered my question, and so if I can, I would like to move on. Can we please go to page 6?
You want the rest of my answer?
She's moved on.
Okay,
Let's move
all right.
on. Save some time.
Mr. Nomalini, in paragraph 9, you state that the site's project diversions are located in critical salmon spawning areas, correct?
Yes.
And you are not offered in this proceeding as an expert in fish or fish biology, are you?
Well, I have a common knowledge of what's going on up there. I've fished up there for years. I'm familiar with when the salmon come up in the fall. So I'm not totally uninformed as to what fishery issues are, and I have some due to my years of fishing and interest in fish. I have a pond around my house. I raise fish in that pond. I like the environment, and so I think I'm more than above the average person with regard to knowledge about fish,
In
including
paragraph-
this area.
Thank you, and I do apologize. It was not my intention to interrupt your response there. In paragraph 9, you also discuss project impacts to sacred cultural concerns of Native Americans, correct?
Yes.
You don't identify which Native American tribes would allegedly be impacted by project intakes, do you?
Well, I didn't specify there, but it's obvious Trinity River water comes into the Sacramento, and plus there are concerns of the Native Americans with regard to the Sacramento River in its totality and sacred grounds above the reservoir. I'm familiar with their position with regard to that because they objected to a rising of the water level in Shasta.
And can we please scroll to see paragraph 10? In paragraph 10, you say that there is no substantial evidence that site's water is limited to water that is surplus, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
You did not perform a water availability analysis, did you?
Well, there's some obvious things that are going on that would indicate a limitation on the availability of water. The state Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation have failed to meet the water quality standards due to lack of water. And I have analysis in my testimony of the pre-project planning, which anticipated getting 5 million acre feet from North Coast Development by the year 2000. And I explained that that was not done, and it's clear and well understood that there was no development to provide that 5 million acre feet.
Mr. Nomalini, just for clarification, I'm specifically asking yes or no questions because I'm working off of limited time on behalf of my client, and I want to be mindful of maintaining our time. So I think your answer to that question is no. And so I would like to move on to the next question.
Now, wait a minute. Now, what do you think is no, that I didn't give any evidence?
No, I asked the question of you did not perform a water availability analysis, correct?
Well, none other than evaluating the fact of what happens with the performance of the projects.
Mr. Nomalini, you didn't cite to a water availability analysis prepared for the site's project, did you?
Well, define for me what a water availability analysis is. I think the factual setting of what's been going on is obvious that there is not available water for the purpose that sites outlined in its application.
I can move on. In paragraph 10, you reference the need for a valley drain. Construction of the site's project does not eliminate any opportunity to address any alleged drainage and selenium problems, does it?
Well, it doesn't include that, and it plans to include a great deal of export to the downstream area in the San Joaquin River area, some of which is going to go to Westlands presumably. The site's application is pretty vague as to what they're trying to get a permit for, but the list includes people on the San Joaquin River that discharge into the underground and then in turn to the river that adds salinity and selenium, which affects fish, to the San Joaquin River.
Can we please move to page 7, lines 2 to 11? In paragraph 11, you state that consideration of the site's application should be delayed until new Bay Delta water quality objectives and standards are set, correct?
Yes,
Are you aware that the site's water application requests inclusion of standard permit term 96, confirming the State Water Board's reserved jurisdiction to modify any site's permit to implement updated objectives adopted in any future Bay Delta Plan amendments?
what happens if it means that there's no water available for sites?
I would move to strike as non-responsive. I'm asking if you are aware or not of that inclusion of the permit term.
Oh, I'm aware that language was put there, and to me, it's meaningless. It doesn't add to whether or not there's unappropriated water here or water that can be assigned from the state permits in the best public interest. Those kind of statements don't mean anything to me.
Can we please scroll down to paragraph 12 on page 7? Thank you. In paragraph 12, you state that the needs in the watersheds and counties are increasing due to increasing development. You don't identify which watersheds and counties you're referring to, do you?
I do not, but I'm talking about all the counties in the watershed.
In paragraph 18, you state that it does not appear that the State Water Board has, oh, I apologize, we are scrolling to page 10. Thank you. And Mr. Nomalini, in paragraph 18, you state that it does not appear that the State Water Resources Control Board has correlated the present and future real surplus water availability with the quantity of water in state filed applications within its trust, correct?
Yes.
And you don't cite to any statute or regulatory provision that requires the board to do so before assigning a state filed application, do you?
Well, I think the public trust demands better management of the water than is being carried out by the State Water Resource Control Board, Department of Water Resources, the governor, and the Secretary of Resources.
Will you please go to page 15? Now, in paragraphs 37 through 39, you cite to Water Code section 10505, which we've discussed, regarding the requirement that a release from priority or assignment not deprive the county in which the water originates of water needed for development, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that SITE does not dispute that this requirement applies to its petitions?
Well, I think they agree.
Did you review or hear the presentation of testimony by sites regarding whether the petition for assignment and petitions for release from priority would deprive counties of origin of water necessary for development?
I didn't hear the testimony, no, but I'm familiar with their position. Is there something specific you want me to address?
No, you've answered my question. Thank you. Are you aware of the memorandum of understanding entered between the site's project authority and Colusa County intended to ensure that the project will not deprive the county of water needed for development?
I'm not familiar with the agreement, but is that a permitted use that sites is seeking under its permit? In other words, can those people go ahead and just start, let's assume that Sites gets a permit, can they go ahead and start diverting?
I think you understand. I'm not going to answer the question, so we
Okay,
can.
well, my problem is you don't just have a statement like that and be assured that the people in the county are going
Mr.
to be.
Normalini, I apologize, but I believe you've confirmed for me that you're not familiar with the
Hold on.
memorandum of
Okay,
understanding.
I'm gonna object to the tone and the interruptions. They're starting to seriously irritate this side of the table. If he's answering a question, you think that he should be answering, then you could object right away, but I don't want to wait for his two to three lines in. You don't like what he says and then ask him to stop. So I like him to be able to finish the question that's asked.
Let's start with this, Ms. Chester. If you can repeat, if you have not gotten the response you would like, if you can repeat the question, because I don't know where we are. Or you can
Sure.
move on to the next, please.
Mr. Nomalini confirmed for me that he is not aware of the memorandum of understanding. And I certainly mean no disrespect, but I am moving through these questions efficiently. And since he already confirmed that lack of knowledge, there was no need to go further about his speculation.
Well, I am aware that there was a reference to a memorandum of understanding, and you stated what it said, that they would be entitled to go ahead and have a priority over, I guess I'd say a priority over sites. And I'm just trying to tell you, that doesn't mean they can divert water. They got to go to the state board and file for an application. And the state board will interpose term 91, which stops them from diverting under those conditions when the delta is in balance and they're releasing 1 acre foot of stored water and there's still natural flow in the system. That's my answer.
Thank you. Can we please move to page 20, paragraph 57? Mr. Nomalini, in paragraph 57, you state that sites cannot be found to best develop, conserve, and utilize in the public interest the water sought to be appropriated, correct?
That's correct.
And you cite to Water Code section 1253, correct?
Yes.
Can we please bring up Water Code section 1253, which was submitted by email?
Submitted by whom?
Mr. Nomalini, if I acknowledge to you that this is the complete text of Water Code section 1253, would you agree?
I thought I had it well stated. I don't know what the difference is between this, but that says under the terms is that a judgment will best develop, conserve, and utilize the public interest the water sought to be appropriate. Yeah, that's my understanding of the requirement.
Isn't it correct that the complete requirement as stated in Water Code section 1253 is that the board shall allow the appropriation for beneficial purposes of unappropriated water under such terms and conditions as in its judgment will best develop, conserve, and utilize in the public interest the water sought to be appropriated?
It's got to be unappropriated water. It's got to meet the requirements of the law. And in order for it to be in the best public interest, you shouldn't be able to take taxpayer dollars and subsidize the state water project with the application.
Hearing Officer Kenzie, I would move to strike that response as non-responsive. I'm simply seeking to confirm his understanding of the complete text of Water Code section 1253.
Isn't that what he just, I'm sorry, but yeah, I think he just gave his understanding of what the text means. That is not what you were asking for. Were you asking for confirmation of the words themselves? I don't think we need to go there. This is 1253. We can all look up 1253. I think we can.
Thank you. I will move on. Can we please go back to SDWA 11? Page 20. Thank you. And can we please scroll to paragraph 59? Mr. Nomalini, in this paragraph, you state that the site's proposal conflicts with the California Water Plan, correct?
Yes,
Did you review the 2023 California Water Plan update?
I did not. I cited the sections of the water plan that I'm referring to.
Is there a reason why you did not reference or discuss the 2023 Water Plan update in your written testimony?
I don't think they can change the rules of the game at this stage in good faith, carrying out their public trust responsibility. I don't think it's relevant.
Can we please, actually, we're on the right page. In paragraph 60, you state that the site's proposal conflicts with water quality objectives, correct?
Yes,
And you don't state which water quality objectives the site's project may conflict with, do you?
well, it's going to take water that's already appropriated, and that's going to interfere with the ability to meet water quality objectives. They're not meeting them now. There's no plan to meet them. They haven't included any plan in their proposal to make sure that the water quality objectives are going to be fulfilled. All they say is they're not going to interfere with the state or the federal government.
Mr. Nomalini, I will interject on this one. I believe Ms. Chester's question was whether you identified any particular water quality objectives.
Did not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to the extent relevant, I would move to strike the beginning of the answer. In paragraph 61, you assert that sites will deprive counties of origin of water necessary for development, correct?
Yes,
And again, you don't state which counties sites may deprive of water necessary for development, do you?
I did not specify them, but I'm talking about the whole watershed of the Bay of the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta.
Can we please scroll to see paragraph 62? Thank you. In paragraph 62, you state that the site's application ignores the application of term 91, correct?
Yes,
Are you aware that the site's water rights application, which was submitted more than 2 years before submission of testimony in this proceeding, requests inclusion of standard permit term 91?
I'm not sure I was aware of the timing of when they recognized it, but that's fine. They put it in there. It's not being applied properly, in my opinion.
To clarify, you just stated that it's not being applied properly, but you were not aware that term 91 was included?
Well, term 91 is an obstacle to the ability of the counties to actually apply the water.
I don't think my question has been answered. Were you aware that standard permit term 91 was included in site's water rights application?
I'm aware it's in there now. I'm just not aware of the timing of when it was put in there.
Thank you. Can we please scroll to page 23? And down to paragraph 71. Thank you. Mr. Nomalini, beginning in paragraph 71 through paragraph 77, you discussed the proposed voluntary agreements, correct?
Yes,
Your discussion in these paragraphs does not mention the site's project at all, does it?
I don't see it.
Can we please go to page 25? And scroll to paragraph 78. Mr. Nomalini, beginning in paragraph 78 through paragraph 82, you discuss the responsibilities of state officials, correct?
Yes,
And your discussion in these paragraphs does not mention the sites project at all, does it?
Well, I don't see the word sites in there, but I'm talking generally about public official action, including their action on the site's application.
Can we please go to page 27? And can we please scroll to paragraph 83? Mr. Nomalini, beginning in paragraph 83 through paragraph 91, excuse me, you discuss public trust protections, correct?
Well, I'm looking for the words, but yeah, I'm concerned about public trust protection, yeah.
And you don't include any discussion or analysis of the sites project in those paragraphs, do you?
I didn't mention sites specifically, but I'm very concerned about the actions on sites. It has no physical, no objective standards that have to be met in the application. All they're talking about is not interfering with the state or the federal government's compliance with water quality objectives. And I've suggested throughout here that objectives have to be applied to the sites project directly and to their water rights. Otherwise, I think that is a violation of the public trust.
Can we please can we please scroll to, excuse me, paragraph 91? Thank you, and a little bit further to the bottom of this paragraph. In paragraph 91, you conclude that the site's application includes major exports from the Delta, correct?
Yes.
Did you review the testimony offered by Mr. Burke in these proceedings?
Did not.
Are you aware that he characterizes the modeled increase in project exports from the Delta as, quote, relatively small?
I'm not aware of that. What I see, and I gave you the exhibit on the place of use, that could be a tremendous amount of water.
Can we please
Not
go to,
specified as a limit. No, I didn't see Burke's testimony.
can we please go to page 30?
I think we're on it.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you. Can we scroll then to paragraph 92? Beginning in this paragraph 92 through paragraph 100, you discuss the duty of the state to consider public interest in its decision, correct?
Yes.
And you don't include any discussion or analysis specific to the sites project application in those paragraphs, do you?
Well, again, I'm repeating, my general concern is protection of the entire Bay Delta watershed. And, they're supposed to include these considerations and protection in the public interest if feasible. And denial of the site's application would be the appropriate action at this point, unless it's clarified and we know more about the water quality standard changes.
Can we please move to page 34? Mr. Nomalini, beginning in paragraph 105 through paragraph 114, you provide excerpts of certain policy statements by Bureau of Reclamation and Department of the Interior officials, correct?
Yes.
And the documents containing those excerpts have not been submitted to the AHO in this proceeding, correct?
Well, they're publicly available. I can provide them.
Can we please move to page 50 at line 16? in paragraph 159, you conclude that because a 1960 proposal to develop project on the rivers and the North Coast watersheds was not completed, that there is therefore no surplus for excerpt except in wet years, correct?
That's my opinion. Correct.
Are you aware that the site's project authority proposes to divert in wet years?
Well, yes, in the definition of what years they propose to divert. And as I explained previously, that it's not limited to flood flow.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. With that, Mr. Soderlin,
I have no questions. Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Mitchell, I believe you indicated you probably didn't, but I'll turn back.
That's
Do you have any
correct.
questions?
We
Okay.
do not have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Mendel-Rice.
I do not have questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Then with that, Mr. Rees, if you have any redirect based on those questions.
I don't have any redirect.
All right. Then with that, thank you, Mr. Nomalini. Thank you so much for your testimony and thank you for joining us this afternoon and this morning. And with that, I believe you are excused. And if we need to take a short, who is next? Dr.
Herbold.
Herbold.
The
And Miss
I
Meserve, Miss Meserve is going to be conducting that examination.
Great.
And I believe he is on here. I did have one question procedurally, since the objections are due on Friday.
Yes.
And that question is, when will the transcripts be posted on the website? Because we have been trying to review the Zoom transcripts. I understand that the transcripts are required to be part of the record for this proceeding, and I'm troubled that they aren't in that location. I understand Sites has paid for them because there was not agreement or an order that the cost be shared, but I believe they should be posted as they become available so that all of the parties can benefit from that. I don't know what we'll cite to in objections otherwise.
So Ms. Meserve, my understanding of the arrangement and my direction is that the site's project authority is paying for the reporter. It is not provided by the State Water Board. And my direction was if the authority or any other party chooses to cite to transcripts, then those transcripts must be made available at that time. Other than that, they don't need to be, they're not part of the record. I don't think I can direct them to be, given that they're not being funded by the State Water Board. So at that, the official transcript for purposes, or the official record for this proceeding is the audio-visual recording. It's awkward to cite. That's all I can say about that. But that is the official record, and that's what you would need to work from.
However, if Sites was to submit the transcripts, they could be placed in the FTP site, right? So it's just a matter of the
Absolutely.
fact that Sites has not chosen to share those.
That is correct. Once we receive them, they will be made available on the AHO FTP site, on the FTP site for this proceeding, and all of the parties will have access. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
All
will
right.
just need one moment to find the correct paper. That ended a little quicker than I was thinking.
Sure.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Hearing Officer Kenzie, did you say we'd take a quick break before this, or are we going to move right into Dr. Herbold?
We can. Would you like a break?
Well, maybe it might make sense to take a break after his direct is concluded, if your intent is to move forward now.
That would be that makes sense to me.
Great, thank you. And I would like to note, we do have some objections that we'd like to make with regard to the scope of the testimony, as we've done with some of the other witnesses.
Would you like to do that now,
Yes, if I could.
please?
So as to Dr. Herbold's testimony, which is at SDWA 51, we would object to paragraphs 6 through 10, paragraphs 16 through 18, 21, 22, 24, 32, and 36 through 38 on the basis that they are inadmissible opinion testimony by an expert witness with lack of qualifications for the subject matter and statements in those paragraphs per Evidence Code Section 801. And we will submit an email with those paragraph numbers for the benefit of the other parties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, if we're ready, I will administer the oath. Welcome, Dr. Herbold. If you would please raise your right hand. Dr. Herbold, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Ms. Meserve.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Dr. Herbold. Thank you for your patience in being here. Dr. Herbold, is SWA 53 a true and correct copy of your testimony?
It is.
And is SWA 52A a true and correct copy of your curriculum vitae?
It is.
And is SWA 63 a summary of that testimony?
It is.
Thank you. And with that, I think we are ready to proceed with the summary.
Cool.
So if Ms. Mullen, if you would not mind, please putting up SWA 63.
Cool. And good afternoon, Officer Kenzie, Ms. Mullen, and Ms. Cott, and the rest of the Administrative Hearing Office, and the rest of you out there in Zoom land. I started my graduate studies in 1979 at UC Davis, and have worked extensively ever since on the intersection of water, fish, and climate change. I have also published on all of these topics. In 2017, I served as a reviewer, helping the California Water Commission evaluate water projects that were claiming environmental benefits and thus eligible for Proposition 1 money. I strongly supported Site's Reservoir project for their proposed benefits to salmon and other Central Valley fishes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
If I'm Mr. Herbold, may I ask you to slow down just a tad?
I shall try my best. I am sorry. So in 2017, I served as a reviewer, helping the California Water Commission evaluate water projects that were claiming environmental benefits and thus eligible for Proposition 1 money. I strongly supported the Site's Reservoir project for their proposed benefits to salmon and other Central Valley fishes. Is that better, Mandy? Ms. Medina?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Please don't hesitate to tell me to slow down. It is one of my many failings. Then, this year, I was asked to review the project now that it had proposed operations and detailed evaluations. I was disappointed to see no details of how the project would operate to achieve environmental benefits. I was further dismayed to find that their estimates of environmental impacts in the EIR were inadequately supported. My concern rests on two aspects of the modeling and some clearly missed opportunities to convincingly describe the project's impacts and properly mitigate them. To describe existing conditions and their impacts on fish, the project proponents chose to base existing conditions on the hydrology of the years from 1922 to 2003. Those historical data do not represent existing conditions in the state for the last 21 years. Despite public statements by the proponents that the project will help us adapt to climate change, the proponents chose not to model environmental impacts of the project through the last 21 years, when climate change has been most obvious and most problematic. There is widespread recognition in the scientific and popular literature that California's climate has shown strong evidence of climate change. These changes, particularly more frequent and severe droughts and rarer but more cataclysmic floods, were predicted by climate scientists in the decades leading up to the year 2000. With hindsight, those scientists have traced our ongoing climatic trends back into the 1970s. May I have slide 1, please? The next slide. So this is the drought conditions of California from 1928 forward. And as you can see, in the Palmer, I'm sorry. So this slide shows California's history of drought since the Dust Bowl drought. The Palmer Drought Severity Index combines precipitation and temperature as a way to index drought. After the Dust Bowl, California had no official droughts for 40 years until 1976-77. Throughout the 20th century, the balance of generally wet conditions interrupted by occasional dryness kept the long-term average of the drought index near zero. In the current century, I do not have the numbers, but it is clear on the right-hand side of the graph that we now have drought with occasional floods, and that drought is winning overall. Even though we have had record-setting precipitation in the last 20 years, the overall background of drought and increasing temperature has reduced the degree to which those floods have reduced the drought conditions. It is difficult for me to imagine how the project could provide much benefit to the environment in the conditions of the last unmodeled 21 years. May I have the next slide, please? This slide, slide number 2, shows the precipitation pattern for the rainy months of January, February, and March from 1922 to 2024. Two significant changes are apparent. First, the precipitation patterns have gotten more variable in the last 50 years. And secondly, in earlier years, the rainstorms carried over from month to month. However, in recent years, the spikes in precipitation have been intense but short-lived. These short spikes in precipitation would probably limit how much of the precipitation would be available for diversion and storage by the project, and use either for diversion or for environmental benefits. And finally, on the last slide, may I have the slide 3, please? Is the daily modeling that was done of recent years, and this could offer much more insight into project impacts and benefits. And here it is clear that diversions would occur over much less than a monthly time step, as was used in the calcium modeling. The monthly average flows would suggest diversion possibility for an entire month, but under the daily model, those opportunities are much more brief because the higher flows are briefer than a month. I had thought it would be valuable to superimpose the presence of salmon in the Sacramento River in the last 21 years to estimate how many of the outmigrating young salmon would be exposed to diversion operations. Similarly, if the project offered any details on how they might discharge water to benefit salmon, such benefits could be estimated too. Unfortunately, the graph shows a confusion of monthly and bi-monthly time steps, which reinforced my first impression that the EIR did not provide a useful assessment of project impacts. And I just draw your attention to, as you go on the x-axis here, September to October, and then October to December, leaving out November. Then December to January for 1 month, but then January to April, spanning 2 months. And I cannot imagine what how to separate out the daily diversion possibilities with the graphed spikes, given this changing of what the x-axis represents.
May I ask you one more time to slow down? Thank you.
I am nearing the end, and I will try my best. Sorry. Public statements by the proponents and the introductory material in the EIR emphasize the importance of dealing with climate change on California's water supply. I find it puzzling and disappointing then that the analysis excludes the 21 recent years when climate change impacts were extremely problematic. Analysis of daily diversion operations with the corresponding data of salmon presence over the last 21 years could offer valuable insights on the project operations under actual existing conditions and actual salmon occurrence. I propose, if the permit is granted, that the permit conditions include, first, diversion operations should be limited to daylight hours. Young salmon
Dr.
migrate.
Herbold, excuse
Yes.
me, Ms. Mullen, would you please take down the PowerPoint? I don't think we will need it anymore. Thank you.
No, thank you. So diversion operations should be limited to daylight hours. Young salmon migrate principally when it is dark to reduce predation risk. Increased diversion rates due to the new project are likely to slow their passage and change their behavior so as to avoid impingement on the fish screens. So as to avoid impingement on the fish screens, I can speak clearly. Changes in their behavior are likely to make them more subject to predation. Secondly, the proposed operations include triggers to protect outmigrating salmon. These triggers appear to be designed to protect a number of young salmon at risk, but it is just as important to protect the genetic diversity of the outmigrant population. Early and late outmigrants are likely to receive less protection under the proposed operations. On the other hand, annual differences in temperature, turbidity, timing, and amount of river flow could make the timing and/or degree of protection more or less valuable. Assigning a constant percentage of diverted water each year to use for salmon protection under the guidance of appropriate regulatory agencies could greatly increase the effectiveness of protective actions. 3, the project should account for the protective measures taken each year, the timing and volume of released water or bypass diversions, and the reasons for the protective actions should be reported annually. Fourthly, in its decision 1641, the board adopted a range of outflow requirements. The board has received much input on the importance of outflow to many aquatic species, and that for all species examined, more flow is better, as brought out in your science report of 2017. The maximum delta outflow required in D 1641 is 27,000 cubic feet per second. Therefore, the board identified 27,000 cubic feet per second as the most beneficial outflow under their jurisdiction. No new diversions should be allowed at any time when delta outflow is less than 27,000 cubic feet per second, or that would reduce delta outflow below 27,000 cubic feet per second when it is that high. Fifthly, as a junior diverter and storer of water intended for the State Water Project and Central Valley Project, the project should be required to help meet water quality standards when those projects are unable to do so, thus helping to meet water quality standards and reducing the need for any temporary urgency change petitions. And with that, I conclude my testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Herbold.
Thank you.
I believe with that, it is time for a short break. I think that's what we talked about. Let's go ahead and thank you so much. And then let's go ahead and we'll break for just 10 minutes until 2:17 and return for cross-examination. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back. Ms. Medina, are you ready for us to go back on the record?
Yes.
Thank you. With that, I will look to Mr. Hitchings. Do you have questions for Dr. Herbold?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Herbold. My name is Andrew Hitchings, and I represent the Sites Project Authority in this proceeding. Thanks for being available and for answering our questions today. Ms. Mullen, could you please bring up Dr. Herbold's testimony at SDWA 51 and scroll to page 3, paragraph 1, if you could? And yes, if you could scroll down to, okay, yeah, paragraph 1 here. Dr. Herbold, your formal education and advanced degrees are summarized in this paragraph 1 of your testimony and also detailed in your CV and SDWA 52A. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And your formal advanced degrees are in ecology, biology, and zoology. Is that correct?
Yes,
You do not hold any formal advanced degrees in hydrology or water resources engineering, correct?
correct.
And you do not hold any formal or advanced degrees in climatology or meteorology, correct?
That is correct too.
Ms. Mullen, could you go to page 3, paragraph 4? So I think it's the same page, just scroll down to paragraph 4 and lines 22 to 25. In those lines, Dr. Herbold, you state that in 2017, and I think you mentioned this during your summary in the beginning, was that you were impressed with the work presented in support of the site's Proposition 1 application and supported public funding for the project, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware of the California Water Commission's determinations on the site's Proposition 1 application regarding the ecosystem benefits, flood damage reduction public benefits, and recreation public benefits to be provided by the site's project?
I have not reviewed it closely, but I am aware of their conclusions.
And have you reviewed Mr. Jeff Herron's written testimony submitted by the site's authority in this proceeding, in which describes the site's Proposition 1 WISIP funding application and the California Water Commission's determinations regarding the application?
I am aware of it. Again, I have not pursued it closely.
So you haven't reviewed Mr. Herron's
No,
testimony?
I have not.
Ms. Mullen, if you could please go to page 4 and scroll down to paragraph 6, if you could. And in particular, line 5. Dr. Herbold, here you reference SDWA 58 when discussing the state's shifting climate, correct?
Correct.
And if we could pull up, Ms. Mullen, SDW 58. Thank you for toggling back and forth between the documents. And maybe if you could scroll down just to show the cover page or do a full page view. So this is a 2022 report prepared by PPIC Water Policy Center titled Priorities for California's Water Thriving with Less, correct?
Correct.
And when you cite to this document in your testimony, you only cite to its content related to climate change, correct?
Correct.
If we could scroll to page 7, please. And if you could zoom in on that first full paragraph in the middle of the page. And without reading this yet, were you aware that on this page, the report finds that it's essential to increase the resilience of water supplies, including building new surface storage?
It is important to increase the resilience of their supplies, and they reference a variety of ways that that might be achieved.
When you prepared your written testimony, were you aware that that statement appeared in this report when you cited the report?
Yes.
So I'd like to just read that paragraph there. It says it is essential for California's economy and well-being that urban and rural communities increase the resilience of their supplies. This will involve a portfolio of actions along with unprecedented regional cooperation. Urban communities will need to continue their efforts to manage long-term demand while making significant investments in supplies, including building more interconnections with other communities, new surface and underground storage, new reuse and recycling projects, and more stormwater capture systems. Do you disagree with any of those recommendations, Dr. Herbold?
Not in the general sense, no. I would even add on some others.
Could we go to page 15 of the report? And if we could scroll down so we could see the paragraph below the photograph that starts with finally. Were you aware of the statements in this paragraph when you prepared your written testimony, Dr. Herbold?
Yes, I was.
And so in that paragraph, it states, finally, it is vital that wet year management for communities, farms, and the environment be as robust as our efforts at dry year management. Coordinated and integrated statewide, regional, and local actions will allow us to develop plans for capturing and storing water in wet periods so that it can soften the harm of dry periods. Like my question with the paragraph above, do you disagree with any of those recommendations?
No, I do not. I especially agree with the last sentence.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last word.
I said I especially agree with the last sentence that you did not quote.
Oh, thank you. And if we could go back to Dr. Herbold's testimony at SDWA 51, please. And if we could go to page 5, paragraph 7, I think we're on the right page here. So Dr. Herbold, in this paragraph, you reference the variability in precipitation and cite to water year 2013 as an example of a critically dry water year, and 2011 as an example of a wet water year. You see that?
I do.
And according to your testimony, and you also reference them as being record-setting years.
Yes.
In the last line there. What do you mean by record-setting?
We got more in shorter periods of time in 2011 than we had until 2017. So they were setting records for their moment, but we continue to see sharper, stronger wet year events.
And how about for 2013? What did you mean by that being a record-setting year?
2013 was in the middle of the driest 4 years in our history, driest 4-year period in our history. And then along came 2020. One could say the same of 2020, where we had the driest 3-year period in our history.
Okay, if we could go to page 7 and paragraph 12. And lines 14 to 15. Dr. Herbold, there you discussed the drought impacts of the 1970s and 80s on winter run Chinook salmon, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that the calcium 2 model includes this time period in its data set?
Yes.
And if we could look in the same paragraph at lines 16 to 18, you assert that the shift to drought conditions in most of the 21st century greatly depleted the winter run salmon population and led to closures of the Pacific salmon fishery. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you aware that the Pacific Fishery Management Council reported that the ocean harvest impact to age 3 winter run in 2022 was estimated to be approximately 26%?
No, I did not know that. I did not follow the ocean fisheries.
Are you aware that that 26% harvest impact rate on winter run salmon exceeded the 20% maximum harvest impact rate allowed for the ocean harvest of winter run in 2022?
No, I'm not. But the harvest rate was so small that percentages are probably small numbers of fish.
But you're not aware
No.
that they exceeded the limit set?
No, I keep my nose pretty much in the Central Valley and Bay.
Okay, thank you. And if we could go to page 8, paragraph 15. And lines, if I could direct you to lines 14 and 15. Dr. Herbold, you state that the applicant's choice of the reference time period of 1922 to 2003 hinders the ability to discern whether the project would be in the public interest, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that the final EIR/EIS for the sites project analyzed potential hydrologic conditions at years 2035 and 2070?
Yes, we haven't been there yet.
But you're aware that they analyzed those hydrologic conditions using the climate change modeling data sets to do that?
I am aware of what they did. I have not pursued it because I do not believe that they accurately represent the existing conditions. So comparison with future conditions as modeled do not hold up in my mind.
Did you review the analysis in the final EIR of the 2035 and 2070 scenarios before you
No,
finalized your?
In no detail whatsoever. I do not believe that they can provide us with anything against a baseline that does not include the climate change we have already seen.
Are you aware that those, I'm sorry.
Taking it up to 2003 leaves off all of the climate change effects we have already seen. So then when you put in climate change effects in those later years, it is as if all of the climate change is happening then, when in fact we have already gone through climate change and it's already had a lot of effects. So it overweighs the impacts of climate change relative to whatever the project impacts are.
Okay, and if you could go to lines 16 and 17. There you state that the EIR/EIS fails to include without explanation the most recent 20+ years. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you aware that the final EIR/EIS does explain its use of calcium 2 and its simulation period of 1922 to 2003 and its master response 3?
I do.
Did you review that master response before you finalized this testimony?
Yes, I did not find it convincing.
But it does contain an explanation, does it not?
It is an explanation. It is not an explanation that I bought. That I should have reworded that an unconvincing explanation.
If we could go to page 9 and table 1-1, please. Dr. Herbold, in this table 1-1, you compare the 80-year calcium 2 data range to a 10-year date range used for the divertible flow tool. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in your view, is it reasonable to compare the frequency of water year types in a 10-year period to the frequency of water year types in an 82-year period?
Yes, in fact, it's more reasonable to my mind because I don't think that the years from 1922 to 1976 have much to tell us. They were nice, fat, wet years, most of them. And we have not seen anything like that except for the last 5 years of the 1990s since then. So the divertible flow tools, it's a very different hydrograph to look at. And it is exactly in keeping with the predictions of climate change. We had really wet years, nothing in between, and then lots of critical years.
Well, in your general experience, is a 10-year period a sufficient sample size to complete a full analysis of potential project diversions and potential project impacts?
I would rather have 21 years. But it's better than putting in years which we are unlikely to see the like of in any future scenario.
Are you aware of the limitations of the divertible flow tool?
Yes, but at least I'm aware of some of the limitations of it. I mean, getting the months right would be a big step forward.
Are you aware that it does not include full operations of the sites project?
But since sites is taking water off of the flood flows, not taking most of its water from releases from upstream reservoirs, I think that the use of calcium to coordinate amongst reservoirs is less important for sites reservoir than it is for most other reservoir operations.
Well, are you aware that it does not consider carryover storage or reservoir releases?
But the carryover storage and other issues are things which would change somewhat the flows, but to the extent that sites is taking flood flows, that's not going to be as much of an issue. But it does deal with daily issues, and especially for fish, the daily issues are the important scale. Using monthly time steps doesn't allow much look at how the fish are moving, because they often move. I mean, the individual fish do not move on a monthly time step past the sites area. We could use that divertible flow tool to watch how many fish actually go by in a given time, because we have those fish numbers. If we had daily diversions, we could start to estimate the actual impacts of the project.
Are you aware that the tool resets the reservoir storage at the beginning of each water year?
I don't remember that. I read it. I do not remember that statement, but I am more interested in what the diversion looks like, which would only be somewhat affected by how much water they're actually storing.
In any event, a tool with the limitations that it has and that you're aware of, it cannot accurately demonstrate how sites will operate over the long term and identify potential project impacts over the long term, correct?
Objection, the questioner is testifying at this point. Where's the question?
I think that I'm going to overrule it. I think that was a question.
Could I rehear the question, please?
Yes, we just talked about the limitations that you're aware of with the divertible flow tool. And my question was, with those limitations as you understand them, that tool cannot accurately demonstrate how sites will operate over the long term and identify potential project impacts over the long term. Is that correct?
May I expand?
I didn't hear your answer.
Before I answer, may I expand on my answer?
You, of course, can explain your answer. Yes, Dr. Herbold.
Cool. Thank you. They are both tools. They both have serious failings. Calcium 2, especially in looking at fish impacts, is not useless, but not very good. It's good for looking at things which move on a monthly average, but fish do not. And so the daily tool is more valuable for looking at fish impacts or fish benefits. The calcium 2, and especially the graph I posted in my figure 2, shows that the daily divertible flow tool shows very brief periods when diversions were possible, whereas calcium 2, taking a monthly average flow, would assume that those diversions were possible the full month, because the average flow is enough to justify diversions, but the flows actually come in sharp peaks. So more than half the months pictured in figure 2, or sorry, figure 3, would have not been available. So they both have problems.
Yeah, my question, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I'm done.
My question was whether it can accurately demonstrate how sites will operate over the long term and identify potential project impacts over the long term. Can it accurately do that, the divertible flow tool?
Given how calcium 2 is used, I don't think either one does a very good job of that.
That my question wasn't about calcium 2. It was about the divertible flow tool.
And I'm saying it is from the fish viewpoint, it is more useful than calcium 2.
Dr. Herbold, to the extent you can, please do answer the question directly. I haven't heard a response directly to Mr. Hitchings' question, which if you need it again, we can.
Question again.
I'm asking you whether, given its limitations, do you agree that it cannot accurately demonstrate how sites will operate over the long term and identify potential project impacts over the long term?
I'm sorry. The question implies that there's a better tool, and I don't think there is a better tool. I think it is the best tool for the job.
You think that the divertible flow tool is the best tool for the job of assessing over the long term project operations and project impacts for sites?
Project operations and project impacts are a variety of things. I don't think either tool is a good tool for that job. I think some are better for some of those jobs. One of those tools is better for some jobs than the other, and the other tool is better for other questions. But it is mixing together different things to ask which is a better tool.
I never asked what's a better tool, but I will move on.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I understand.
In my mind that calcium 2 does not answer the questions that I want to know. The divertible flow tool is the better tool. You posed the question as, is it can it do the long term? And since it only deals with the 10 years there, if 10 years if there are 10 meaningful years, yes, it does a better job.
Okay, we can move on. Thank you. If we could go to, I think it's on the same page, paragraph 18, lines 21 to 22. Dr. Herbold, there you state when discussing the impact of drought conditions on sites, as a result, the proposed reservoir is unlikely to be full as much as assumed in operation and other plans associated with the site's application. Do you see that?
I do.
And you don't cite to anything in support of that statement, correct?
Only the preceding sentence.
And
we had 2 flood years. Those were modeled in the way that I would like to see more of. But we haven't had years like that since the late 1990s when we last had 2 more or less wet years back to back. So given that, the assumptions behind the modeling that we will have lots of wet years back to back as we used to in the period from 1922 forward is unlikely to be true.
Are you aware that the site's water availability analysis modeling included a historical analysis that relied on actual measured flows for January 2000 through September 30th, 2021, and that's completed on a daily time step?
Yes, and my point is that I'd like to see that applied for the environmental impacts, because it's that daily time step that I think is useful. The calcium period over the longer haul is irrelevant nowadays.
And if we could go to page 10, paragraph 22, please. Here, Dr. Herbold, you assert that in the EIR, climate change is applied to the 2040 and 2100 scenarios and excluded from the existing reference timeframe. Do you see that?
I do.
And you cite to AHO 95, page 28-9.
Check.
Can we, Ms. Mullen, pull up AHO 95 and go to that page 28-9? Maybe if there's a way to see most of the page at least. Is there any reference on that page to the 2040 or a 2040 or a 2100 scenario?
I believe I was addressing to the last paragraph.
The paragraph that starts with to analyze the effects?
Yeah.
And is there any reference to 2040 or 2100 scenarios being evaluated?
Those are the periods that were being evaluated in the future. Again, yes, I was.
Well, are you aware that the authority never looked at a year 2040 or year 2100 scenario? They looked at years 2035 and 2070.
I'm sorry. I was. No, I know where I went wrong. I'm sorry. You have corrected me correctly.
All right, if we could go to back to Dr. Herbold's testimony, Ms. Mullen, please, SDWA 51. That was fast, thank you. We go to page 11 and paragraph 26. Lines, I'd like to direct you to lines 18 to 20. Here, you're referring to daily exports in the first sentence of that paragraph.
Check.
Oh, am I on the? Hold on one sec. I think I have the. Yeah, daily exports on line 19. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
What are you referring to when you are referring to daily exports?
Sorry, turn off my phone. Sorry. That the calcium runs are running on a monthly, and if you try to figure out what the daily exports would be on a month in which there's floods and not flood days, to get that level of export, you would require higher exports than depicted. To get
Are you talking about? I'm sorry. Are you talking about diversions from the Sacramento River to storage in sites or daily exports in the Delta?
I'm sorry, diversions to storage and sites, yes.
Okay. And on line 21 of that same paragraph, you refer to intake screens. Do you see that?
Yes.
And which intake screens are you referring to?
The ones into sites at Hamilton City and
Hamilton City and where?
I'm sorry, my brain is just going blank. Oh, yes, I am turning 71 next month. All right. Sorry, the brain's just a brain fart.
Well, so the
two diversion
our
points for sites.
I'm sorry,
that's
I didn't catch it.
I'm sorry, my brain is just not bringing up the name of the second diversion site for sites.
that's fine. So the two diversion points that are proposed are, one is at the Tamacalusa Canal
Thank you.
fish screen intake near Red Bluff, and the other was the Hamilton City location you mentioned.
Yes.
Are you aware that sites diversions at those proposed points of diversion would be required to comply with applicable approach and sweeping velocity limits set by NMFS?
Yes. I'm also aware that those are chosen to be good. They do not remove the impacts of the fish streams.
And if we could go down to paragraph 28, lines 15 to 18. And there, Dr. Herbold, you state that diversions are assumed to be primarily on the descending part of the flood flow, so fish would likely experience much lower sweeping flows than the monthly flow calculations would suggest and be exposed to the screens longer. Do you see that?
I do.
Well, wouldn't the approach and sweeping velocity limits imposed by NMFS address those circumstances, since they would be in place regardless of what day of the month or as the flood flow starts to descend? I'm sorry, or as the flood flow starts to descend.
And the site's operations protect the first part of that outflow, and that was the first event there. So there would be a time of protection, but that by the time that time of protection was over, the flows had already fallen quite a bit. So the sweeping flows would be really less than the monthly average would lead you to believe.
But the sweeping and approach velocity limits set by NMFS would remain in effect regardless of that circumstance, correct?
Yes, NMFS does a good job, but they do not eliminate the problems of having fish screens in the way of the fish.
And you haven't prepared any type of technical analysis or analysis that quantified any potential impacts as to duration of exposure to the fish screens or otherwise, correct?
No, it would be nice to have those daily operations so that you could see how many fish were exposed and do that sort of calculation. See,
have you ever, I'm sorry, thought you were finished.
I am done. Yes. Sorry.
Have you ever visited the proposed point of diversion for the sites project at the Tamacalusa Canal fish screen intake?
Not since it was improved. Back many years ago, I was doing work on Red Bluff Diversion Dam and saw the old version, but I've not in person seen the new ones. I've only seen the write-ups and pictures.
When you say the new ones, that's both for the TC diversion point as well as the Hamilton City diversion point? I'm sorry, I think you might need to repeat that.
Yes.
That you have not visited either of those, correct?
No, not in person.
If we could go to page 14, Ms. Mullen, and paragraph 34. And lines 20 to 23. There, Dr. Herbold, you state that current available information indicates that only 244,000 acre feet, about 17% would be managed by the state and be available for environmental purposes. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you aware that under the Water Storage Investment Program, half of the state's Proposition 1 investment in a particular project must be dedicated to ecosystem benefits?
That was my understanding when the project went forward. Is that 17% incorrect?
Well, the fact that the WISIP funding requirements for a project require that half of the investment must be dedicated to ecosystem benefits. That doesn't necessarily mean that half of the stored water in sites must be used for ecosystem benefits, correct?
Correct. And this whole thing is to partly explain why I have changed my mind about the project. And that was when I reviewed it, the Prop 1 money paid for half of the expected cost of sites. And so it was getting half the value of the water, and it was getting half the value of the electricity to be generated. But that whole electrical generation has not gone through. So it just right there, a lot of the benefits of the project have gone away since it was described in the Prop 1 proposal.
If we could go to page 15, paragraph 35, and lines 3 to 4. Here, Dr. Herbold, you state you were unable to locate information in the site's application materials on how claimed environmental benefits are to be achieved. Is that correct?
Yes, I was expecting something like what was in the Prop 1 proposal.
Well, did you review the site's water right application materials submitted by sites to the state board, which are contained in the AHO exhibits?
Not all of it.
Did you review Appendix C, which is the water right application supplement regarding the proposed purposes and places of use for the sites project? And that's at AHO 005.
I don't think so.
Well, are you?
I'm
sorry.
looking for anything that would supply that, but I will admit that there is an overwhelming amount of paper.
Well, are you aware that Appendix C includes a detailed discussion of the proposed use of water for fish and wildlife enhancement purposes?
I will have to look at that. I'm sorry.
And are you aware that the site's project description in Chapter 2 of the final EIRAS also explains the project's public benefits, including ecosystem benefits?
That is, I think, is where I was getting the rather arm-waving impression, much less specific than was in the Prop 1 proposal. If you could bring that up, I would appreciate it.
Well, we don't need to bring that up, actually. I don't have a question about the specific text in it.
I do not have everything that I looked at categorized in my mind, and that is not one that I have here at hand. So I'd be curious to see what it says. But my impression of what I had read, and I'm sorry I missed the appendix, was that there were going to be consultations with Fish and Wildlife and no actual explicit actions to generate benefits. Is that incorrect?
Well, I'm ready to move on. You answered the question that I had, so I appreciate that. Thank you. If we could go to page 15, paragraph 38, please. And I've just got a clarifying question about this. You state on line 26, Dr. Herbold, that flood flows come about once every 5 years. Do you see that?
Yes.
But you don't cite to any reference or support for that statement?
It could be drawn off a figure. What is that? That's figure 1.
Well, is it based on a particular 10-year period or a different period of record?
For the 21st century, so the 21 years I have referred to before, that would yield a credible picture of how the project would operate.
Okay.
Because and then we had 2011, then we had 2017, we had 2006. So they're about 5 years apart. I'm sorry that was just having lived through that. That's something I assume to be common understanding of California.
If we could go to page 16, please. And you had summarized these in your direct, Dr. Herbold, but this section, recommended permit conditions, it includes 7 recommended permit terms, correct?
I believe so. I only covered 5.
Are these permit terms specifically requested by SDWA or the other Delta Water Agency parties, or are these just your own recommendations?
These are my own recommendations. As a fish biologist, having worked here, these are just my own recommendations to the project.
Okay, thank you. And then in paragraph 40, lines 17 to 18, if we could scroll down a little bit. Here, you indicate there should be no release of water with cyanobacterial loads at discharge flows more than 3% of river flows. Do you see that?
I do, and I was delighted to see that the amount of discharge can only be 1,000 CFS, but I was one of many people who learned that in the course of these proceedings.
And does that satisfy that concern that's expressed by that permit term?
In almost any conceivable flow situation, yes.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to page 17, Ms. Mullen. And lines 1 to 4, you also summarized this earlier during your direct. But for this recommendation, you don't cite to any reference supporting this recommendation, do you? Of the 2,700?
27,000.
27,000, excuse me. Thank you.
No, there was the 27,000 comes out of the 1995 Water Quality Control Plan, the 1641, and that was the highest flow, more fish. The state board adopted the 27,000 limit as anything beyond that is out of anybody's control.
Well, are you aware that the site's water right application requests inclusion of standard permit term 96, confirming the state board's reserved jurisdiction to assign responsibility for future Bay Delta plan requirements?
This was not my suggestion for the future Bay Delta plan. It is that under the current plan, the most protective outflow is 27,000, and that would mean that at that flow we would actually have floods. And since the project says that it is going to be taking flood flows rather than picking individual points in the river, I think that the total outflow is a good tool to use to identify what a flood is.
So this would just be until there is some, this recommendation is just until there is some new updated amended Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, correct?
Yes.
And if we could go to lines, I think we're on page 17, lines 15 to 17. And here, Dr. Herbold, you say that sites should be required to help meet water quality standards when the State Water Project and CVP facilities are unable to do so, thus reducing the need for TUCPs. Do you understand that the sites project is not part of, it's not proposed to be part of the CVP or SWP?
I do understand that, but they can be receiving water from those, and they're mostly delivering water to those projects. And so I agree with some of the other comments that other presenters have made. that it should be treated as a cooperating partner with its clients.
But the Bureau of Reclamation could potentially use their share of water from sites to help meet water quality standards if they choose to do so, correct?
If they can do that, then they wouldn't be requesting a TUCP. Or it should be denied if they request it when they have water to spend.
I didn't catch that last sentence, Mr. Herbold, or Dr.
I'm
Herbold.
sorry. If they have water that would help them maintain water quality standards, they shouldn't be asking for a TUCP. The request for a TUCP should clearly imply that they do not have the water to meet the standards.
Are you familiar with the June 12th, 2024 joint letter that cites DWR and the state water contractors submitted to the AHO requesting the inclusion of a permit term to prevent any potential adverse effects of sites on CVP and SWP operations?
No, but I don't think that addresses the problem. That addresses what I'm suggesting here.
Are you aware that of Reclamation's July 3rd, 2024 concurrence letter submitted to the AHO confirming Reclamation's support for that permit term?
No.
Hey, Dr. Herbold, thank you very much for answering our questions. That's all we have at this point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I will look around the room. Mr. Soderlund, do you have questions for Dr. Herbold?
I do not, thank you.
Ms. Mitchell, do you have questions?
I do not, thank you.
And Ms. Mendel-Rice?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Please.
Just going to try to get my camera to work. Hello, Dr. Herbold. My name is Jenna Mandel-Rice, and I represent the state water contractors. Thank you for your time today. Would you agree that new water storage is one of the management responses needed to respond to climate-induced changes?
It could be one of the uses, one of the tools.
Isn't it true that snowpack in the Sierras acts like a storage reservoir that releases water later in the year as snow melts?
When we have snow.
And under future climate scenarios, is it your understanding that there will be more rain and less snow?
We've already had that for the last 25 years.
And do you understand that sites would store water from winter storms for release later in the year?
I do. That's why I supported the project in its original description. The devil is in the details.
Thank you. I'd like to go to paragraph 6. Let's start with paragraph 6 of your testimony. And Ms. Mellon, if we could pull that up, that would be great. Let me just make sure that I'm on the right paragraph. It might be one off. Just give me one moment. In this paragraph, you indicate that the wettest year on record is 2017. What is your source for this statement?
So the wettest year on record was 1983 overall, but the storms that hit. So we had monthly highs in 2017 that exceeded what we'd had before. So that sets the record.
And again, what is the source of that information?
CDEC.
I'm sorry, I didn't get.
I'm sorry, the California Data Exchange Community? God, what's the last C stand for?
Center, I believe.
I think that sounds good. The California Data Exchange Center, maintained by DWR, compiles all the history of how much water we've gotten and what's done with it.
And when you reference the wettest year on record, what's the geographic location you're referring to?
Uh,
Are you,
Cedar-
is it all of California or is it the Sacramento River?
That would be the Sacramento Valley. It doesn't include the San Joaquin Valley because of what we've done to San Joaquin. It is
In
the-
line 8, you state that the third wettest year on record was 2019. And is the source of this statement also the California Data Exchange Center?
Yes. I love CDEC.
And was this also for the Sacramento Valley?
Yes.
And so just going back to the 2017, you acknowledge that the wettest year on record from CDEC is actually 1983, correct?
Yes, if you take it the, yes, that says, yes.
And in lines 8 through 9, you state that 2020 to 2022 are the 3 driest years on record. And again, is the source
The driest 3-year period on record, the driest successive 3 years.
successive 3 years? And would you agree that the driest year on record in the Sacramento Valley is 1977?
Yes. So far.
On page 4, line 9, what is the basis for your statement that the most intense October storm was in 2021?
Because we have very few October storms, and that was a good one. And it became yeah, it's just simply that was a phenomenal short storm, unlike October as pretended. Do you know differently? Do you have reason to think differently?
I'm not here to answer questions. You're here to answer the questions.
Okay.
Where was the location
To
of
the
that
best of
storm?
my knowledge, that is a true statement.
And where was the location of that storm?
Sacramento Valley.
I'd like to talk about figure 1.
Okay. What?
This figure was taken from the website that you provided in a link in footnote 1 of your testimony. Is that correct?
Yes. Ms. Medina, could you bring up figure 1?
It's just down a little bit further on this page, I believe.
There we go.
There it is.
And this is a representation of the California Palmer Drought Severity Index, correct?
Correct.
And you did not create this index, is that correct?
No, I did not correct that. I did not create it other than to download it from the source.
And this is a statewide index, correct?
Correct.
And so it uses hydrology and temperature from across the entire state of California.
It does.
And that would include Tulare Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, the North Coast, and all of Southern California, correct?
It would, yes. But we get all the water.
Isn't it true that in the Bay Delta watershed, there could be a wet year on the San Joaquin River, but not on the Sacramento River?
There have been different degrees of wetness on either side, yes.
So within a watershed, there could be different hydrology between individual watersheds.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And this would be more true across the state. So for example, different hydrology on the North Coast than in Southern California.
Certainly.
Isn't it also true that the Sacramento Valley could have an unusually hot summer in the same year that Southern California is having a mild summer?
Yes. But I would point out that that was true for the entire data exchange here over the years from 1928 to 2024. So it takes a lot to get a pattern out of that big a data set. And I think the pattern is clear that we've had droughts here. We've had worse droughts than we have ever had before.
So how does the California Palmer Drought Severity Index combine all of the different hydrology across the entire state and the temperatures from the entire state to create a single line that's represented in this figure?
It does. It takes the total state precipitation and average temperature across the state. It paints with a very broad brush.
And so it would also paint with a very broad brush, determining whether a single month is either yellow or green in this figure, correct?
It's statewide, so it would take a lot to have any real odd things show up, any things that were peculiar like that. But yes, sure.
We were not able to find the equation, any equations that demonstrate how this average was calculated. Do you happen to know where the equations or the calculations for this are located?
I would have to go reconstruct how I got this. I'm sorry, it was a while ago. It was May 2024. Yeah, it is statewide. So and it's statewide and it's monthly. So they took statewide temperatures and statewide precipitations and calculated them. And the structure of the index itself is fairly straightforward. It shouldn't be difficult to construct it for the last 20 years, but I did not do that.
Did you use the California Palmer Drought Severity Index to make conclusions specific to the Sacramento River watershed?
Let's see, what did I conclude here? As you see at the lines 14 there, the shifting climate is apparent in Figure 1. Droughts since the year 2000 are longer, more severe, and more frequent, and wet years are isolated and less frequent. I think that is what that shows there for statewide, and it's even more true for some particular areas, but the overall pattern is clear.
So you did not use this to reach particular conclusions with respect to the Sacramento River watershed?
Correct.
Isn't it true that there are multiple instances of back-to-back dry and or critical water years in the historic record from 1922 to 2002?
There were in the Dust Bowl drought, and then starting in 1936, we did not have any back-to-back. We had 2 back-to-back dry years. We had no dry and critical years until 1976 and 77, when we got hell on earth.
Let's move down to paragraph 9, please. Really what we're going to be looking at is the figures, I think, that follow. So maybe the next page, figures 2A, 2B, and 2C. That's perfect. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. The source of these figures, and I think right now what we have up there is 2A and the top of 2B, but I'm assuming it's going to be hard to get all 3 on the same page, but the source of these figures are the NOAA website, Climate at a Glance, statewide
Correct.
time series. Is that correct?
Yes, these are statewide numbers.
Okay.
And it's
In these figures, the blue line is the trend line, correct?
Yeah, right. And the general agreement is that there's really no trend in precipitation. It just gets more variable from year to year and from month to month. So variability increases through time, but the trend lines are to illustrate that there is no trend in mean, in the average.
And so you're showing 3 different months here, January, February, and March. Did you also look at the annual trend for the same time period?
I have looked at that a lot, but I really wanted to get at the fact that the arrival of atmospheric rivers means that we get a given month wet, and the next month may be entirely different. And I think that really comes clear in the right hand of these three graphs when you compare them. The spikes are not in the same time.
And so you are not looking at this for purposes of looking at the trend. You're looking at it for purposes of the spikes.
For the increase in variability through time, as we get more spikes, more spikiness on the right-hand side of the graph than on the left, and that those spikes get higher and the values get lower. Those are the trends that climate change has predicted since before the 90s. And we have actually gotten that now. We keep seeing it over and over again.
Is there a statistically significant trend in outflow during the 100-year period?
No, not if you start in the full century. I've worked with people that are looking at that annual pattern. I have not done it myself.
And my pause is not because I'm asking you to speak more. It's I'm reviewing my questions so I don't duplicate questions that have already been asked. So bear with me for a moment, please. Let's go to paragraph 18, please. In paragraph 18, you reference, and this is line 19, you reference flood years. What do you mean by flood years?
The last 2 years, which have been 2023 was quite wet. 24 was an above normal year. Both had much more water than the preceding 3 years. So flood in the sense that they generated uncontrolled flows.
On page 17 of your testimony, and Ms. Mullen, I won't make you go toggle back and forth, but you define flood flows as being 2,700 CFS of outflow. Is that correct?
27,000.
Sorry, yes, 27,000 CFS. Is that correct?
It's a convenient measure of flood, yes.
Okay.
If you hit that, it is outside the state board in adopting the 27,000 outflow as a target. Implied that anything greater than that was outside anybody's control.
Isn't it true that 27,000 CFS of outflow can occur in any water year type?
Sure. Although, yes, sure. And probably has in everything except some of the recent droughts.
Moving on from this paragraph, I think we can go down to maybe paragraph 32 or approximately thereabout. Not going to ask you too many specific questions about the text, but just for record purposes, that's what we're thinking about when I'm asking this line of questions. Mr. Hitchings asked you a question about the relationship between sites and the Central Valley Project, and I believe you indicated that sites can deliver water to the CVP and SWP. Is that my correct is my understanding of your prior testimony correct?
Yes.
What is the basis for your assertion that sites can deliver water to the State Water Project?
That seems like such an odd question to me. They exist to deliver water to customers of the State Water Project.
Do you understand there's a difference between individual state water contractors and the State Water Project?
Yes.
And so
in this case, though,
referring to individual state water contractors.
I'm sorry, you all are cross talking and I did miss your question.
Sorry.
Let me start again with my question and then I'll have Mr. Herbold answer again. I apologize. So you understand that there's a difference between individual water contractors and the State Water project. Is that correct?
I do.
And so what you are, I believe what your testimony then would be is that sites can deliver water to particular state water contractors to the extent that they are participants in sites. Is that correct?
Correct. And that it would be delivered to them via the state water project, which is required to meet water quality standards. If they
And
can.
when you say via the state water project, are you referring to the South Delta export facilities?
Yes. Sorry, yes.
But you agree that Department of Water Resources is not a participant in sites?
Not as an agency, correct, yes.
I believe you are familiar with the term balanced conditions as it relates to conditions in the Bay Delta, correct?
Yes.
And do you understand that balanced conditions to be a time when the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project are making reservoir releases and cutting exports to meet regulatory requirements?
They are doing some combination of those things, usually cutting exports to meet some water quality requirement.
And do you agree that these regulatory requirements include protection for fish and wildlife?
Yes.
Would you also agree that these regulatory requirements include meeting water quality control plan standards?
Yes.
Do you understand that sites would not be allowed to divert when the delta is in balanced conditions?
Yes. If they have diverted before that, then they are a junior diverter and they have water. And if there is not enough water to meet water quality standards, then others should be, I think, brought in to help meet water quality standards to protect fish and wildlife and Delta agriculture.
I assume you're also familiar with the term excess conditions as it relates to conditions in the Bay Delta.
I am.
And do you understand excess conditions to be a time when the Central Valley Project and State Water Project have met all of their regulatory requirements?
Yes. All of their water quality requirements.
And so you understand that the term excess conditions means that all in-basin uses have been met?
Yes.
And you understand that sites would divert during excess conditions?
Yes.
And so you understand that sites can divert during excess conditions because the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project are already meeting water quality control plan standards and there is water available for diversion.
Yes, I do understand that. I also know from my career that most of the species we care about show improvements in abundance with more water, and that water far above excess conditions is often most beneficial to the species we care about. So that excess conditions does not identify no environmental impacts.
Just ask one more question, I think, which goes to paragraph 34. What is the basis for your statement that the new biological opinion for the Central Valley Project will include new mandated carryover storage?
Discussions with people who still work for the agencies that I used to work with. I was on the panel that put together the biological opinion for Delta Smelt in 2008, and I haven't lost all of my connections since then. It seems to be an open issue because I'm sorry, since the listing of winter run salmon, the importance of carryover storage in Shasta to protect their cold water pool has been an ongoing issue. The change in the 2019 biological opinions eliminated any measure of carryover storage, even though it had always been the central issue for NIMS to protect winter run salmon. And so it is an expectation of my own, reinforced by expectations of people actually involved, that we will have carryover storage requirements again.
But that's not the official position of the National Marine Fishery Service, correct?
It is not. It is just
I
my
have no further-
understanding.
I have no further questions.
Thank you.
What do you want to be reminded about?
With that, Ms. Meserve, do you have any redirect for Dr. Herbold?
May I have a 5-minute break, please?
Sure thing. Let's go ahead. We might as well make it 10, and then we'll come back at 3:38.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Medina, are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Meserve, have you decided whether you have redirect for Dr. Herbold?
Thank you, Hearing Officer Kinsey. I just have a couple of questions. It won't take long, I hope. Dr. Herbold, in the questioning by Ms. Mandel Rice, I believe it was suggested that the Bureau of Reclamation could release water to meet standards if stored in site's reservoir, if constructed. In your experience, would Bureau of Reclamation be likely to make a release that was not strictly required?
Objection calls for speculation.
I think that's fair, Ms. Meserve, so sustained. But you can try
Well,
that a different way, possibly.
Perhaps I should have objected to the initial question that's calling for speculation, but I believe the issue that was put forth was, well, Bureau of Reclamation could do this, and I think so. I'm just asking. Dr. Herbold has decades of experience in water, and I'm asking about in his experience whether such a release beyond what was required by a permit, condition, or other regulations would happen.
I think,
Go ahead,
Mr. Hitchings.
I think my question was, could they do it? And Ms. Meserve's question was, is it likely whether they would do it? And that's the difference in calling for speculation.
The objection is sustained. Also, Ms. Meserve, I think I understand the point as well. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. In addition, Mr. Hitchings asked you, Dr. Herbold, about the PPIC report references to suggestions for surface water storage as a way to address climate change. In addition to surface water storage, what other what would you be looking for as a fisheries expert in trying to address these changing climate conditions?
Objection. This goes beyond the scope of my cross on this, which was just the contents of what's in the report and whether he was aware of those other recommendations when Dr. Herbold only used the report to reference its content regarding climate change impacts.
Do you want to respond, Ms. Meserve?
I was just trying to let Dr. Herbold explain what his recommendations would be further, since he was aware of the recommendations in PPIC report and wasn't allowed to expand on that.
I think I'm going to allow it because I think it's a question I'd like to hear the answer to. So let's go ahead, Doctor. You would like to respond, please.
Oh, in the last couple of decades, we've made real success on reducing demand. We've got groundwater regulated and a lot of work going into restoring it. There are a number of things, including desal brine, water marketing, that are much less dependent on weather than new major infrastructure, new dams, which are very dependent on the weather. So those are just the sort of things that I think we need to be pursuing most arduously, most assiduously, because we don't actually know what the future climate is going to look like. And so the things that reduce our demand and give us consistent supplies are going to be much more valuable than things which capture the occasional storms. And of those things that capture occasional storms, that is not sufficient grounds for adopting them without actually looking at how well they do the job and what else they do. So that would have been my answer. Thank you.
Dr. Herbold, Ms. Mandel Rice also asked about whether there were regulatory protections for fish and wildlife and water quality standards that would apply to this project. Do you believe those water quality and fish and wildlife standards are adequate?
If they were adequate, the board would not be rewriting them. I expect them, I was a major player in writing the water quality standards that the board adopted in 1995. And the goal of those was to reduce project impacts and to increase habitat value for a number of fish. And clearly, while achieving some of those goals, they were not adequate to the task of protecting the fish and keeping them from going extinct or in danger of extinction. So they need something else, and climate change has made those needs even more pressing and more different than they used to be. So no, I do not think that we can say that meeting these standards that we have is protective. We have several decades now of these standards failing to achieve the goals that they identified for themselves.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, Ms. Meserve. With that, Mr. Hitchings, do you have additional questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Mandel Rice, I think you were the only other question.
No, I do not. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. With that, then, I believe we have completed hearing testimony from Dr. Herbold. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you spending the time to be here to testify. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe with that, we have reached the end of our list of witnesses for the day. Is that right, Mr. Reese or Ms. Meserve?
That's correct.
Excellent. So we're farther ahead than I thought we might be. Let's take some time to talk about what we're going to do next. November 4th, I have currently Mr. Ratto, Dr. Rosenfield, Mr. Ornbaum, and possibly Chairman Mitchum. I wanted to look to the coordinating NGO parties. Do any of you have an update on whether Chairman Mitchum would be able to join us on November 4th? Do I have anyone who is representing the coordinating NGO parties? This is a surprise. We surprise got to the end, maybe. So, all right, we'll come back to that question. I think it would make sense because we have confirmation that Dr. Rosenfield could, if necessary, testify on the afternoon of the 5th, that we would start with Mr. Ratto and then go to Mr. Ornbaum. If we have Chairman Mitchum with us, we could then proceed with him next, and then Dr. Rosenfield. I think we asked for an update on estimates of time for cross-examination of Dr. Rosenfield. Why don't we go through that? Oh, Mr. Hitchings, yes, please.
Oh, I'm not sure whether we have an accurate estimate on that yet, but I think for the other 3 witnesses, I think our cross of Mr. Ratto will be about the same length as Mr. Pellegri, and Mr. Ornbaum is probably less than an hour, and Chairman Mitchum is probably 30 to 45 minutes. So I think that it would be prudent to plan, unless there's other people that expect to cross, that possibly Dr. Rosenfield could go during some portion of the afternoon on the 4th. And I will send out an estimate of that, but it may not be till Monday. We're still going through that. That would still be a week ahead of the 4th in any event.
Understood. Yes, that makes sense. I think, thank you. Mr. Hitchings. What I'm trying to decide is, but part of what I'm trying to decide is whether I ask you to continue to hold. I know we talked about November 5th and November 7th. It is now starting to look to me like we could probably march through everything between November 4th and the afternoon of November 5th. So my inclination would be, let's officially reserve the afternoon. By afternoon, I mean we'd start at 1 p.m. on November 5th. Please sort of pencil hold the 7th, and then if Mr. Hitchings, you come up with, you would like to cross-examine Dr. Rosenfield for 5 hours, I'll put it. I don't think that's what you're going to say, but I may officially put November 7th on the calendar, but I think we won't do that unless it looks like we really need to based on the time estimates. Are there any other questions or comments, anything procedural that we should address today before we take our long break and then come back on the 4th? I thought there might be things that I'm forgetting. I don't know where to start. We'll start with Mr. King. I don't know if Zoom put us in order, but we'll start with Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you. So one question is, just a couple of questions. Ms. Meserve talked about the transcript, and I only heard the last part of it. So when we're looking at anticipating, I guess, rebuttal testimony, what do we actually look at? What is the record? I know there's a Zoom record, but I saw a transcript for like one of the hearings, but can you tell me what we look at and what's considered, how are we going to do rebuttal?
The official record for the official hearing record is the audio-visual recording that's saved on the AHO FTP. Well, I think it's the site's FTP site. That's the official record. That will mean that you will need to, if you're citing to particular testimony that was made during the course of the proceeding, you would need to cite to the timestamp on the audio-visual recording. The Zoom transcript is often useful to find the right spot. If you can get, if you can find a word and then you can find the right spot, get in the general vicinity and then go from there. It's not super convenient, but
okay, great. And then as far as exhibits for the rebuttal, do we add on to our existing exhibits, or is it a new list, or how does that work?
It will be a new list, and I can send out more. Well, I think there are more detailed instructions in the initial hearing notice did have more information about rebuttal, but it will be a new list of exhibits. So you would pick up from whatever number you left off on for case in chief exhibits and continue forward. So if, for example, you were submitting rebuttal testimony, that would be a new exhibit, new written testimony would have a separate exhibit number.
Can we use the existing exhibits as part of the rebuttal, or do you have to I guess resubmit them?
You do not have to resubmit them once those have been offered and accepted into the evidentiary record they're in. So you're welcome to refer to them, cite them, that kind of thing. You do not need to resubmit exhibits that have already been offered into the record.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding the objection of cites to my testimony, I think we talked about your oral hearing for that, but then it looks like the schedule doesn't allow for that. So I didn't understand what your intent was about how you're going to consider the objections to my testimony.
My intent, and thank you for bringing this up, my intent would be to address those on November 4th. If we have time, maybe you can clarify for me, Mr. King, are you available both November 4th and the afternoon of November 5th?
So I'm available November 4th. November 5th, I'm getting on a plane to visit my son in Germany. So it just depends. Well, it could be earlier. I can't remember exactly what my time is, but I think it's an afternoon I'm leaving. So it just depends on the time.
So let's, I will commit then, we will address any response you have to the authority's objections on November 4th, and you can do that orally.
Okay. And then I'm expecting the final objections from the Sites Authority by October 25th, right? They're supposed to come up with their list of objections, or to restate their objections, I guess.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for all those clarifications.
Thank you. Mr. Schutz.
Yes, I have a brief, unfortunately ambiguous response to the question of Chairman Mitchum. We are hopeful that he's going to be able to participate. There has been communication between Friends of the River and Chairman Mitchum. it's possible, but not certain that he'll be able to testify November 4th.
Okay. Thank you.
Best we could do. Thank you.
Mr. Busher.
I confess I was away from my computer for a little while. I just got a note that there may be some questions. I didn't know if any of those were specifically addressed to me or not. If not, I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. No, and you are allowed to leave your computer.
There was a question, excuse me, of Dr. Rosenfield's availability on November 5th. Did Mr. Busher or November 7th, did Mr. Busher ascertain that?
Mr. Busher did reflect to me that Dr. Rosenfield is available the afternoon of the 5th and the 7th. That's my understanding. So I did get that answer. And Mr. Busher, I think there was I had raised the question of whether there was further information about Chairman Mitchum's availability, which I now have somewhat of the best we can do answer to. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Are there any other procedural issues we should address now before we break until November 4th? Well, then I will give you an hour of your time back. I very much appreciate all of you and working through this efficiently today. And I appreciate the witnesses working through this efficiently today. And I will see you on November 4th. We are adjourned.
Thank you.